Thank you so much for joining us here today. We are going to be talking about student finance, and we're joined by Ben Rutter from the Student Loans Company to talk about the new updates coming up and the LLE as well. This is part of our Lunchtime Learning series for teachers and careers advisors that we do, covering different topics to help you support your students. If you've got any questions as we go through this, please pop them in the chat, or there's a Q&A function as well. I'll be monitoring this, so I'll be reading them out at the end, or if there's something that you want clarified as we go through, please feel free to pop that in as well, and we can definitely explain as we go along. I will pass over to Ben Rutter now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come along to this session this afternoon. My name is Ben. I am part of the Funding Information Services Account Managers team at Student Finance England. I've been doing the job for 15 odd years now, so you may have seen me kicking around across the London and East regions, but yep, still here, and I'm a point of contact for anything related to student finance policy, regulations, applications, resources, repayments, eligibility, entitlement, etc., etc., etc. So if you do have any questions about funding, do feel free to reach out to me at any time. But without any more waffle, we will crack on with this session. And as was introduced there, it is about student finance. And what I'm going to try and shoehorn into a short space of time is going to be an overview of the funding arrangements for Student Finance England for academic year 24-25. Then we'll have a quick overview and a reminder of those key messages about applications, repayments, and resources. And then we'll finish up with some of the early high-level information about the Lifelong Learning Entitlement, which is, use the word destined, scheduled to be the future of further and higher education student finance policy from academic year 25-26 onwards. So if you are currently supporting your year 12 or your lower 6 students thinking about their HE options, chances are, unless something radical happens, they will be accessing their funding through LLE. So it is important to know that it is going to be happening and what the fundamental changes are going to be under the funding model. But for the funding arrangements for this coming academic year, not too much has changed, and this recording will be available and these slides will be made available. So I am going to whiz through this section as quickly as I possibly can so we can get on to maybe some, I'll say, more important messages, but some of the more pressing and detailed messages about applications and LLE, etc. So I'm sure you're probably all aware now that the announcement for the funding regulations and arrangements for England for academic year 24-25 was made on the 25th of January. And as was kind of expected, we haven't seen anything particularly radical happening for this academic year with LLE on the horizon. So we already knew this one was happening from last year. The maximum tuition fee loans, the fee cap regulations, all of those things will be maintained for this coming academic year as they were for last year and the year before. And in fact, this will be the 7th year where the fee caps, regulations, tuition fee loan rules, etc., 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 will all have been frozen and stayed the same. So again, sure you are familiar with it. So if the students are doing their full-time courses at their approved fee cap registered providers, they can access up to the £9,250 for their tuition fee loan support. And again, a bit of government speak here. That decision was apparently to deliver better value for students and to keep the cost of higher education down. But again, all of that government speak can be found in the written statement. And if you want to dig into the in-depth regulations, again, you can find those on the legislation.gov.uk website by following this link that is in the slide. In relation to maintenance, so the support that is there to contribute towards living costs, again, we're just looking at the high-level ones here for full-time students. So whether you're expecting a higher inflation rate increase to be applied this year, there was an awful lot of blowback the DfE got last year about only going up in line with the OBR forecast inflations. And there was some talk about them maybe looking at real-time inflation and applying that level of measure to the increases that we're seeing this academic year. Didn't happen. for whatever reason. Again, you have to ask DfE about that, but they stuck with their guns and stuck with the normal inflation increase that they do based on those OBR forecasts. So for this academic year, we are seeing a 2.5% increase across the rates of maintenance loan, dependence grants, disabled students allowances, and the postgraduate loan support that we make available from SFE. So hopefully you can see in that table there the different maximum loan rates that we'll be making available. The study locations still remain the same, so the parental home rate, the elsewhere rate for those students at a provider outside of London, for those students who are living away from home at a provider in London, and then the overseas rate for those students who are taking an approved year abroad as part of their UK-based course. So again, the categories get staying the same, and just seeing that 2.5% increase to the overall value of the loan amounts. Means testing still a thing. So again, no real change there. So again, if you are familiar with communicating those messages about some of the maintenance support being based on household income, and some of it being non-means tested, same principles still apply. And again, this slide here just illustrates the non-income assessed and the income assessed rates that will be available for those standard students from this coming academic year. And again, something that there was some hope in the sector was going to change, but again hasn't, is that £25,000 lower household income threshold for the maximum maintenance loans. So again, the similar principle applies. If the household income that we assess is under the £25,000, the students are entitled to the maximum amount of maintenance loan should they want it. And the general principle, again, still the same, that the higher the household income, the lower the maintenance loan until the student's household income reaches the threshold for the study location, which are in the brackets under the titles there, at which point they will only get the non-means tested elements of the maintenance loan. But again, we will be updating the calculator on gov.uk over the coming weeks if it hasn't been done already. So again, if you are supporting students making their application this year and they are interested in their entitlement, please do direct them to the calculator so they can get an overall estimate of their student loan support. Again, as mentioned, that 2.5% increase applied across all of the main aspects of the student finance package for this academic year. And just to illustrate, so I just picked up the eligible for benefits rate there. So in case you are seeing any mature students, adult learners who do still qualify for means tested income assessed benefits while they are a full-time student, then they can access the higher eligible benefits rate of loan, and that's things like if they are a single parent or they're deaf and qualify for DSA, they're getting PIP or the armed forces support. If they've got a partner also a student, those kind of things, all clearly flagged up on the application form. But again, just to illustrate that point, that those rates have gone up by 2.5% in line with everything else. The dependence grants. So again, if you are supporting any children and any students with children or adult dependents, then again, just please raise awareness of the dependence grants. And again, those rates have also gone up 2.5% in line with that forecast inflation for this coming academic year. Disabled students allowances. Again, we'll spend a little bit more time on this because there's a big push at the moment, both from the government and from ourselves, to raise awareness of DSA, disabled students allowances, and make sure that students are aware just how far reaching DSA is in terms of the sheer range of disabilities, mental health conditions, specific learning difficulties, etc. that DSA incorporates, and making sure the students also get those applications in good time to allow us to assess and process the applications and also involve the third-party assessment partners who are also part of the DSA system process. So again, for this academic year, I keep saying it, 2.5% rise in line with the increase. So the maximum total that students could access through DSA this academic year is £26,948, and that could then be applied across any of the DSA categories, be it non-medical helper, specialist equipment, general allowance, and then travel still kind of sits aside. So if they do need high costs of travel to get them to or from campus, to or from placement, then all of those kind of stand alone from DSA and aren't particularly capped. But I did mention the reforms. And this is going to be a huge shift and hopefully a huge benefit to students in terms of their needs assessments, their assistive technology equipment provision, and also the maintenance. And it's going to be a more streamlined system. So whereby previously there have been multiple providers of assistive technology, etc. Under the government reforms, there are going to be two main providers, StudyTech and Capita, who will support the students through that entire DSA journey of getting the assessment sorted, getting the equipment sorted, and then supporting the student throughout their studies, making sure all that equipment and technology is still fit for their needs. And if you want any updates on that, then again, the link at the bottom of the page takes you to the initial announcement, and we're expecting more clarification on that to be issued next week, I think. Again, as I said, we're trying to do our part to raise awareness of DSA and make sure students understand just how far-reaching it is. So there are guidance pages on Gov and also across our social media channels and other websites. We've been raising awareness that it's not just what a student may consider being a disability. It also covers all those mental health conditions, specific learning difficulties, epilepsy, ADHD, anxiety, depression, PTSD, fibromyalgia, Crohn's disease, what I can't remember what we focused on last year, but a whole bunch of conditions. So again, if you are supporting any students who you think may qualify for DSA, please do raise it with them and make sure they are submitting an application, because there's a whole range of support available to them if they do have disabilities. Getting a little bit more technical now, because these are some of the policy changes which were made for the academic year, and they are quite niche. So you may not see any students who fall into these gaps, but again, it is for completeness, things that DfE have included in the regulations for this coming year. So the first one is a bit of a mission to get your head around, and for me to try and sort of read and communicate as well. But it is for children who are granted indefinite leave to enter or remain by the Home Office where their parent has been granted ILE or ILR as a victim of domestic abuse, or children granted indefinite leave to remain by the Home Office where their parent has been granted ILR as a bereaved partner. Now, if you've been on our journey with us over the last few years, you would hopefully know that the provisions were extended to those who were granted ILR as a victim of domestic abuse or as a bereaved partner themselves. This has now been extended out to the children of those individuals as well. So it brings them in line with children of refugees, children of people with humanitarian protection, stateless peoples, and some of the other categories. So again, it's just more for completeness. And basically that just means that those students will be treated in the same way for student support and home fee status, in the same way as their parent. So they will not be subject to the 3-year ordinary residence requirements we look at for general indefinite leave to remain applicants. So they will only need to be resident in England on their course start date. So again, similar to what the practice that we have in place for refugees and humanitarian protection, etc. Told you it was quite niche. And then the second one, maybe even more niche. Again, this was a British government, I say guilt thing. I don't know if that's the right word, but again, there was some. If you look at the history, it's quite sketchy about what happened in the Chagos Islands. But again, what's happened as a result of that is that the Home Office and DfE have put their heads together, and they're also extending out student support for those British citizens who were born in the Chagos Islands and their direct descendants who are British citizens. So they will qualify for tuition fee loan support and home fee status, again, in line with those students who are resident in the British Overseas Territory. So again, it's more of a clarification and synergy thing between all of the statuses and all of the categories. But again, that just means that these students, if you happen to see them, will not be subject to any 3-year ordinary residency requirements. This would normally exclude these guys from the Chagos Islands, but it's now bringing them into scope for those. And so they will be seen as if they have been ordinary resident in the British Overseas Territory during any of that 3-year period prior to the first day of the first academic year of their course. So again, like I said, quite niche, but you might get someone rocking up and says, hey, I'm Chagosian, or however you pronounce it, excuse my pronunciation. And if you say, oh, hang on a minute, I know something about this, they may now be eligible for tuition fee support to support their higher education journey. And the third one, probably a little bit long overdue, this one, is, again, if you're familiar with the events provisions, i.e. where a student can become eligible for support after the start of an academic year. So they would then be eligible for tuition and maintenance, depending on if it was within 3 months or after 3 months for that academic year or for subsequent academic years of their course. But that events provision is now being extended out to include settled statuses. So after Brexit, settled status under the EU settlement scheme was already included as an event. So if a student started their course, they didn't have settled status under the EUSS, but that was then granted post start of the course, they could then come back to us and say, hello, Student Finance England, I've now been given settled status through the EUSS. Can you please assess me for student finance support? Refugee status, humanitarian protection, Ukraine schemes, the ARAPs, all of those things were already included as an event. But the one thing that kind of sat aside from that was the other settled statuses like indefinite leave to enter and remain. But from this academic year, those categories are also being brought in to this system. So again, if you are supporting a student who doesn't necessarily have their indefinite leave to remain at the start of an academic year, but you know that it's on their way and they are allowed to start their course by their provider, they can then come back to us after they've been given that indefinite leave to remain, and then we can then assess their eligibility from that point onwards. So like I say, it's a big tick for those students, and it just opens up that window which was closed to those who were getting granted settled status after the start of an academic year. Again, just those events provisions, I think I've already explained it. Basically, it just means that if they get given one of those qualifying statuses after the start of an academic year, they can come back to us and get reassessed. But of course, they do still need to be technically eligible, so they need to hold the status and they need to get their applications in so we can assess them. But like I said, mostly not a huge leap forward, but definitely something that was probably long overdue to be done. And if you want any more clarification and details on those, because yes, I'm aware I flew through them because we are time constrained today, you will find on our practitioners website the overall student support information note, which goes through some of those aspects in more details while we wait for the full guidance chapters. And you will also find a memorandum for this coming academic year, which breaks down all of the fee rate increases, all of the maintenance loan categories, the household income splits, all of those kind of things. So if you want those for your research and student education purposes, they are there for you to read. And then also, so if you are supporting any parents or students who are genned up about that and they're saying, how can the Department for Education only justify increasing the rates by 2.5% when real-time inflation was 4% or 6% or wherever it was, then each year DfE put out their equality analysis, which breaks down how they go about calculating what they're going to do, and also, quite oddly enough, the actual impacts and how they're going to impact various groups of students, particularly those underrepresented and WP backgrounds. And they say it themselves that by only increasing the rates in line with this level of inflation, yes, there could be some negative outcomes for students. But again, like I said, if you want to read the DfE justification, it is there in the DfE equality analysis document. Shifting on very quickly to applications, repayment and resources. And from our side of things, this is probably the most important part of the session, because I'm sure you guys do your very best to encourage as many students to apply for their student support as early and on time as they possibly can. But still, we find each year that tens of thousands of students submit their applications to us late. If they get it to us in June, July, they still stand a good chance of getting some of their funding paid when they start their course. But if they drag it into August, September, when they've started their course, they do run the risk of not getting all of their support, or maybe even any of their support, paid for them when they start their course. So again, it's a bit of a plea from us. Please do actively encourage as many students to apply for their funding as early as they possibly can. The key messages stay exactly the same as they have for the last few years. The quickest and easiest way for the majority of students to apply is online through gov.uk. If they can't apply online, they get redirected off to the relevant paper forms, and that is generally now only fee-only applicants. And migrant workers that get pinged off to the paper forms. They do not need their confirmed places at uni or college to apply, so they can stick their first choice on their application form. Even if they've applied for uni, but are now thinking about apprenticeships or gap year or not sure if uni is right for them, they can still submit their student finance application with that first choice. Then they can change the details later if they go through clearing or change their mind or want to cancel. But so we can start the legwork of assessing and processing an application, that message of that you don't need a confirmed place to apply for your loan, just get it done. It still applies and is still very relevant. Evidence. We try to make sure that the journey for students to submit all of their evidence and for sponsors to submit all of their evidence right first time is as easy as possible. So again, just please make sure that students are aware that they will need to give us potentially ID details, valid national UK passport details, share codes if they're an EU national and they're under the settlement scheme, Home Office documentation if they're a refugee or humanitarian protection, or maybe a Chagosian if one comes across your path, all those kind of things. We need all that right the first time around as well, so we don't need to go back to a student and say, please, can you send us X, Y, and Z? And also to spend some time reading and understanding the terms and conditions, particularly when it comes to loan repayments, and keeping us updated with any changes to their circumstance. A little bit more about evidence, covered this off pretty much already. So for students, they hold a current valid UK passport, just bang those details in on the application form. If they don't have a passport but have a UK birth certificate, we don't need to see the originals anymore. They can just upload a copy of that from their online account. Of course, if they're not a UK national, then we might be asking for international passports, biometric residency permits, Home Office documentation, and those valid EUSS share codes for EU, EEA, and Swiss nationals under the settlement scheme. Their university and course details, so we know where they're going and what to assess them for, and their bank account details and national insurance numbers. We cannot pay student loans into someone else's bank account, and yes, we do need national insurance numbers to release funding to the student if they're applying for maintenance. And from this academic year, that will also be applying to fee-only applicants. We will be asking for national insurance numbers for all students moving forwards. Parents and sponsors, again, the easiest way for them to support an application is also online by providing us with their national insurance numbers, which we can then verify their income with the tax office, current year income details, if there has been at least a 15% increase in the levels that we apply. You may have heard about what we call current year income assessments. So when we ask for sponsor details, they provide them from the tax year prior to when the student starts at university, just so we can verify that, not hanging around for something happening after April, so we can get everything ready for the start of an academic year. If something happens to that household income level, so a parent could retire, they could lose a job, they could cut their hours down and work part-time, something like that. So there could be an overall decrease of 15% or more to that overall household income. If that happens, then the sponsors can let us know estimates of that new lower income. We can then go back and reassess the student for a higher rate of maintenance loan. And at the end of the tax year, the sponsor then just provides proof of that lower income. But there's just something that's in place there, which may help with some cost of living concerns, and also something that is put in place to show that in-year circumstances can be taken into account. And also details of other child dependents, so we can apply any disregards to the household income that we assess, and also apply any splits to the assessed contribution as part of the student loan assessment. You might have noticed there that I said we only now generally need national insurance numbers from sponsors, i.e. parents or partners, to support student finance applications. And that's because there has been a lot of work going on behind the scenes to improve what we call the sponsor journey. So again, if you've supported any parents and you've seen the PFF2 form, the parents application form, you know that you used to ask for every single bit of taxable earned and unearned income that the household got. This change has removed 99% of that from their part of the application form. All we do now in the first instance is ask the sponsors, the parents, to submit their national insurance numbers. And we will use those to verify the household income directly with the tax office. Obviously, if they're getting overseas income, freelance, some self-employed, if they're getting a lot of money coming in through pensions and dividends, etc., they may still need to put those on the application form. But for the majority of sponsors who are employed, getting paid through the tax system, this national insurance check will take all of that requirement out of the window. So as long as they agree for us to do it, we will do that. If they don't, or they don't have a national insurance number, yep, they still have to do it the old way. But like I said, for the majority of parents supporting applications, this will super streamline the process. And again, more details can be found on that on the supporting page on gov.uk. For students who are applying this academic year, again, as mentioned, we want as many of them to apply as possible. So at the moment, we do have a mailing list live on our campaign page and our zone on the student room, whereby SFE full-time undergrads can bang in their details, and we will then send them an alert when the application system is open. So again, please do flag up the existence of that and try to encourage as many students as possible to sign up for it. Shifting on quickly to repayments again, and these are messages directly for students. These are the things that we need students to understand about Plan 5. So again, if you're aware of this when it launched last year, nothing has changed because we're not going to see any changes to Plan 5 until 2026, 2027. But they still need to know the basic messages, i.e., that under the initial Plan 5 repayment thresholds, their repayments won't necessarily need to be made until they earn over the £25,000 a year, or the £2,083 a month, or the £480 a week. And that threshold is frozen in place until April 2027, whereby it is then scheduled to rise in line with inflation on an annual basis. When do they start to repay? Again, similar principles as we've seen for X amount of academic years. They do what we call entering repayment, the April after they complete their course, or if they leave or withdraw from higher education. But again, something niche about Plan 5 is the fact that students won't technically enter repayment until April 2026, just because the way that the mechanism is being bedded in to the repayment system. Under Plan 5, they still repay 9% of any income earned over threshold, and that standard principles in place, whereas if they're employed, then the deductions made get taken at the end of the month, week, whenever they get paid, they'll see their student loan deduction taken at their point. And if any stage their income drops below the threshold, their repayments are still suspended. But maybe one of the bitter pills about Plan 5 was the fact that the repayment period was extended out from 30 years to 40 years under Plan 5, and that 40 years starts when they enter repayment, i.e. the April after they finish or leave their course. And then interest, this is something else which has garnered quite a lot of interest, for want of a better word, over the last couple of years, given the state of the economy and how high the interest rates have been. But the fundamental facts about Plan 5 interest are that they will follow RPI only, and that rate gets changed once a year in the March, which gets carried forward and applied in September, unless there is a prevailing market rate cap in place, as there is at the moment. And the government have had to do this to keep the student loan interest rate in line with the rates offered by similar providers across the market. So they need to look at banks and building societies, other lenders, and see what the prevailing market rate cap is, and apply those to student loans to be acting legally and lawfully. Because if they had applied RPI for this academic year, it would have been, was it 14%, something like that? So they had to put the cap in place. And at the moment, they are reviewing that cap on a monthly basis. I think it's currently something like 7.6%. We're expecting to know the rate for the coming academic year in April, but they're estimating that because the interest rate is lower, we're not going to need to see a prevailing market rate cap. But again, that is all very much TBC. One of the important messages about interest for students to understand is, yes, of course, it gets applied to your student loan balance. So it will take how long, so it can affect how long it's going to take for you to repay your loan, but it's not going to affect your weekly, monthly, or annual repayments, because they're always going to be based on what they actually earn and not what they owe. And students can also check their loan balances, keep us updated with their details, let us know if they go overseas or change employer, all those kind of things through their online repayment portal. Again, all of those details can also be found on gov.uk. To promote the messages, obviously we're all across Twitter, YouTube, Student Room, Instagram, but maybe the two main portals, or the main portal for information will be gov.uk, and also our campaign page, which hopefully you've all got bookmarked as a good resource. And we're trying to design this as being a one-stop hub for both students and parents to understand the whole student finance journey. So it's had a bit of a refresh over the last couple of weeks, and now includes things like a student toolkit, which has all the things like eligibility guides. There'll be an eligibility checker of some sorts coming soon, details about household income, details about the student timeline, all those kind of things. And we've also got a whole new page and section talking about the lifelong learning entitlement for students who are going to be starting in their courses in academic year 2025-2026. And that brings me nicely on to the final section, which is about the LLE. And these are just some high-level messages which we are cleared to communicate to the outside world. Because like I said, if you are supporting year 12s, and lower sixes, even mature students who are looking to return to study in the future, knowing about the LLE and knowing that it is happening is getting to be quite an essential thing. So getting a bit of government speak here, the LLE will transform post-18 student finance system in England from 2025 onwards. There's going to be a whole new system, portal, terminology, glossary of terms we're going to have to understand. But the overarching principle of LLE is it's going to give a single funding system, and that will help eligible learners pay for their courses flexibly across, I won't say their working lives or their lives because it's quite an ironic title, but will certainly throughout their time in higher education will allow them to learn flexibly when they want, what they want, and how they want, when they want it, all of those kind of things. So the overall funding pot for LLE for new learners will be a tuition fee loan entitlement worth the equivalent of 4 years post-education funding, which in today's money is £37,000. And for also under LLE, we're going to see expansion of flexible and modular learning. So we'll get into this as we go through the slides, but it's trying to step away from students just thinking, right, I need to do a 3-year degree, then I need to go and work. So it's going to introduce an awful lot more modular courses. Some degrees will get modularized in the future, so it will allow students to do a bit of study here, work for a bit here, come back and study a bit more, do a couple of modules concurrently at the same time if that's what they want to do to help them get to where they want to be. And that's the overarching principle of LLE, and it's all about helping a learner do the right training at the right time for them. So it is a high-level overview of the funding. Already mentioned, so for new learners, 4 years worth of fee entitlement worth up to £37,000 in today's money. Maintenance will be available. We're expecting a statement on that later this month or early next month about exactly how maintenance is going to work, but it's likely going to be linked to the amount of weeks, days spent in attendance on the particular courses or module that the student is studying. All of the target grants that we know will be rolling over as well. So the dependence grants, disabled students allowances, travel grants. The only thing that won't be coming across is long courses, because under LLE, it's going to be the actual maintenance itself will be linked to course length. There will be an additional support pot available to students who are doing what they're going to be calling exception and priority courses. So they may be things like medicine, dentistry, or the healthcare courses like nursing, long courses like veterinary sciences, architecture, courses with placement years, courses with foundation years. Again, all those long courses that we know and love at the minute will also be coming across to LLE, and funding will be made available. Who will be eligible for LLE support? So it's going to be available for both new and returning learners. So for returning learners, they will have what's called a residual entitlement. So they may not have the full £37,000 available to them, but they may have £9,250, they may have £7,000, they may have £500. As long as they have still some entitlement left, they will be able to access that and use it towards learning as they see fit. And their entitlement will be based on their student loan funding they previously received, or if they went to university way back in the day, it will be based on years of previous, not pervious study. We'll change that type. I don't know why that didn't get picked up. When they come to apply for their LLE support. And this is where it's slightly a controversial title, because LLE tuition fee loans under the current policy, unless something changes, will only be available to learners aged up to the age of 60. But learners aged over 60 may still qualify for some form of maintenance. And in relation to residency, other eligibility rules, we're expecting those to pretty much swap over to as we know them at the minute under HE Student Finance. Again, I didn't mention that LLE will be introduced in a phase approach, particularly for the modular aspects. So for academic year 25-26, we're only going to see higher technical qualifications be fully available and fully modularized, and also some previously advanced learner loan funded courses at level 4 and level 5s at OFS registered providers will also be coming across to now be HE funded through LLE. And we're expecting that to develop in the coming academic years until 2027, where the DFE view is then full modularization will be available, and that will include degree courses as well. So if you are supporting students making their choice in 2025 and they're looking at degrees, they may not see it to be particularly different. They're still applying for their tuition in the same way. They're still applying for roughly the same form of maintenance. It's just going to be under slightly different terminology. It's going to be talking about LLE rather than student funding. But if they want to go down a modular road from 2025 onwards, they certainly can. But let's say if they're looking at degrees, pretty much status quo until 2027. So from 2025, yep, all of the courses that are currently designated for student support will come across. So full degrees, PGCEs, integrated masters, foundation years, and those modularized courses, like all the HTQs, those previously ALL funded courses at level 4 and 5, which are coming across, and also some other technical qualifications at level 4 and 5 will be getting dragged into LLE as well. And again, we're expecting a full list as we move later on through this year. Just a couple of quick examples to finish with. So as I mentioned, if they're a new learner, they will have that whole £37,000 to apply for. So they jump onto gov.uk, they create their online LLE personal account, and that will say, hey, you've got £37,000 of support available to you. So they can apply that to, say, full degrees, modular learning, jump on, jump off, credit transfer between courses and providers. So it's all up to them about how they use that funding. And it should technically fund over 480 credits of higher learning, but that'll also depend on how the student chooses to learn, what they choose to learn, and when they choose to learn it. So for example, a student has their £37,000 entitlement, and they then decide to use £7,000 of that towards a 120 credit course in onshore wind farm technology. They then still have £30,000 of their LLE support remaining available to them for their other courses in offshore wind farm technology or solar farm technology, whatever they want to do, regardless of the size of their duration and their original program. So they can then stack those modules together to get towards qualifications. It's up to them, like I said, how they use that support. And then for returning learners, so this is for those who have previously received government support to undertake higher level learning. So they may have some, all, or none of their LLE support remaining available based on their previous funding received. And those who haven't used it all, like I mentioned before, will have that residual entitlement. So for example, so someone like me, for instance, typical graduate who graduated, left their course just before Colour TV came in with my 3-year degree, and that would cost me £27,750 in today's money. Technically, I should have, will have, could have £9,250 of residual LLE entitlement available to me to spend across modular courses, HTQs, whatever I see fit. I could use that to go back and learn something new. And more details about residual entitlement are available online as well. Like I said, this is just something that's been put in place to remove those ELQ and previous study restrictions and to encourage more mature learners, adult learners to come back into higher education and use that residual entitlement to upskill, to retrain, to learn something that is a particular interest to them. But we will be getting more details about LLE as we move closer to the launch. If you want to know any more, then the government details are available on the dedicated LLE pages on Gov, including residual entitlement, fee loan limits, all those kind of things. And I did mention it on the campaign page. We have built in a dedicated section now for LLE. And again, that just covers all of the basic rules and entitlement and examples as we know them at the minute. So again, if you are supporting those Year 12, Lower 6 learners, mature learners thinking about HE in 2025, do flag up the existence of this page on our website. Are there any questions, Saul?
So we've got a few questions that have come in through the Q&A. So you have a question from a student who's asking if they're not working at the moment, are they able to get the maintenance?
If they're not working?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about the question. I think it might be to do with which income is assessed, whether it's their parents' or guardians' income, or whether it's their own income.
The household income is based on their parents. So if they're aged under 25, we would be looking at parental household income. If they are married or in a civil partnership or cohabiting with a partner and they're over 25, we'll be looking at those details as well. They could be independent if they're aged over 25, if they're estranged, if they're a care leaver, if their parents are deceased, if it's impossible for us to contact the parent, those kind of things. But the students' income themselves isn't based on, the students' maintenance, isn't based on if they are working. The only time we'll actually look at a student's income is if they are on like a sort of a day release from their employer to attend the course, but still technically getting paid. We might ask if they're getting a massive amounts of interest coming in through trust funds, savings, all those kind of things. But generally, a student's income isn't taken into account. The only way that a student being employed can affect maintenance is if they're a EU migrant worker, whereby that they will be needing to hold down UK-based employment to still be eligible for maintenance. So if that's what the question is linked to, if you are a migrant worker and you're getting maintenance because you were employed, yeah, you will still need to be employed to maintain your maintenance. But if you've been made redundant, contact our contact centre and they can let you know if there's any extension to that rule and policy.
Yeah, thank you. And then we've got a question about, do you have the maximum figures for the special support loan?
I do, yeah. And like I said, the memorandum is available on the policy site, the policy page of the practitioner site, and they're all in there in a chart. If you want them directly, contact me and I can send them to them. Like I said, they're all available now in the memorandum.
Yeah. And then we've got another question regarding repayments of student loans. If a person starts working overseas in any country, do their loan repayments stop? And does all their student loan get cancelled if they work overseas for decades?
That's a vicious myth that's been kicking around since actually before I started at SLC, that if a student goes overseas, their loan gets wiped. No. That's why I said it's important to read those terms and conditions. That will state if the student is going overseas for more than 3 months, they are obliged to contact us and let us know where they're going to be going, what they're going to be earning, so we can set up a repayment plan for them. If they're going to be under the equivalent repayment threshold in that country, then they don't need to repay. But obviously we will know where they are. So we're not going to be chasing them, and we're not going to be applying the non-compliance rate of interest, and they're not going to get into any strife when they come back to the UK and then start earning through the tax system again. So yes, if they are going overseas, they do need to let us know, particularly if it's more than 3 months. But as long as they are transparent up front and let us know exactly what's going on, the system works as it is over here. They'll just set up a repayment plan with us if they are earning over the threshold based on the currency of the country they're living and working in.
Yeah. And then we've got a question. Got a request to send the link for the memorandum. what I'll do after this webinar is I'll email everyone to thank them for coming. If you're able to share the link with me, I can add that on to the email so that everyone receives that.
Yes, it should be the first link I had on the slide that mentioned it.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, we'll be sharing that after this webinar. And then if the parents are divorced, is the assessment just based on the parent who the student lives with?
Yeah, the general principle is that we'll be asking for the income of the parent the student spends the majority of the time with. So they might be able to tweak that in some way, that we look at the parent with the lower income. But if that parent is cohabiting with another partner, then we'll be asking for those details as well, because cohabiting partner or step parent is also something that gets taken into account.
Yeah. And I think that is the last question. So thank you so much for everyone for attending, and thank you to Ben for going through that. I'm sure everyone found that really helpful, and it was really good to get an overview of what's coming up and what the system is at the moment as well. We will end the webinar here, but I'll send through an email after this for everyone. And if for any teachers or careers advisors on the call, if you would like us to organise any talks for your students on student finance or another subject, please feel free to get in touch with me. Thank you.